After the War Games, this is a massive improvement, at least visually. It's all in colour and on film, so it looks more like The Prisoner or The Avengers than Doctor Who. It's like suddenly going from this to this. The downside is the sound is not as good on location, so I guess that's why they went back to studio shooting. Jon Pertwee takes a while to make an impression. He's basically silent for most of the first 2 episodes. But once he joins up with Liz and the Brig, he slots right into the role. Caroline John is less impressive, I'm afraid. She's introduced as a skeptic like Dana Scully, which is rather redundant in a show in which aliens obviously exist. The story itself is quite simple but certainly effective. There's plenty of gruesome scenes of people being killed by Autons. It's not exactly Hellraiser, but by Doctor Who standards, it's pretty grim. The famous scene with the shop window dummies attacking innocent passers-by is actually a lot more effective than the much tamer version in Rose 35 years later. Only the climax is a letdown with the Doctor wrestling a big plastic octopus and making silly faces. So a point off for that, but otherwise it's an excellent start to the new era. 9. This should really be called Doctor Who and the Silurians, or even just and the Silurians, but I prefer to call it the Silurians. Hey, stop that! Oh, sorry. Yes, the soundtrack is a bit intrusive, and visually it's certainly a step down from the last story, shot on videotape and colorised from black and white, although that's not really anyone's fault. As with the rest of the season, it's 7 episodes long. Personally, I prefer the first half, where it's all about building up the characters and establishing tension. And the Silurians are mostly seen from their own point of view, like Michael Myers in Halloween. They're much scarier that way, as opposed to the later episodes, where you can see that they're just blokes in rubber costumes. It's also very hard to distinguish between them, as they all look and sound extremely similar. Apologies for being racist. But the show does at least try to give them individual personalities, which is certainly a step forward. The best guest actor in the story is Fulton McKay as Quinn. He has some great scenes with Jon Pertwee, and it's a real shame that he gets killed off so early. Otherwise, it's all about establishing the regulars. Jon Pertwee really settles into his role here, clearly relishing the chance to drive around in Bessie, and being the strong voice of peace when both the humans and Silurians are dead against it. Caroline John is a lot more relaxed than in the previous story, and she even gets to become the de facto lead of the show in the scenes where the Doctor and the Brigadier are trapped in the caves. And speaking of the Brigadier, this is probably Nicholas Courtney's biggest role in the show so far. He's front and centre in every episode, and he certainly makes the most of it. His decision to blow up the Silurian base at the end is somewhat controversial, but given the Silurians are shown to be overwhelmingly hostile throughout, you can certainly understand it. Another cracking story, 8. I do like the way the opening credits are interrupted by the reprise of the previous episode's cliffhanger. It's a great stylistic device, and it's a shame they didn't carry on doing that for the rest of the series. This is one of those stories that I'm least familiar with, as I've only seen it once before and never even read the novelisation. So the twists and turns of the story certainly kept me wondering what was going on. It's got a very X-Files feel to it, what with killer aliens, shady government officers, and a conspiracy to hide the truth. So it feels very ahead of its time. On the downside, it does perhaps drag on a little bit too long, and I'm not entirely sure the story completely hangs together. And when we do see the aliens outside of their spacesuits, it's not very impressive, but fortunately that only happens briefly. William Dysart is the standout among the guest cast. His character Regan is wonderfully immoral, and it's a shame he didn't get to make another appearance. On the whole, it's probably the most grown up the show has ever been, very much in line with shows like Do Much from around the same time. But even so, it's probably the weakest story of a very strong season. 7. As much as I love this season, it is starting to get a bit samey. Yes, the Doctor is exiled to Earth, but surely there's more to Earth than scientific bases that look like gasworks. Still, at least in this one, he gets to escape to a parallel world, in which everyone is a fascist. I do enjoy parallel world stories, but this one is a bit more thinly sketched than most. It never really delves into the details of this world's history and exactly how it deviates from our own. It just throws you in there with the Doctor and expects you to figure it out for yourself. And the weird thing is, it does kind of work. We get just enough details that we can extrapolate the rest. The Prime Mods are probably the least successful aspect of the story. It's never really explained why exposure to the slime makes people go all green and hairy, but I suppose they needed a monster to keep the kids happy. Nicholas Courtney is a bit of a revelation here. In his previous appearances, you could be forgiven for thinking he was just playing himself. But as the brigade leader, he really gets the chance to show off the breadth of his action skills. Caroline John is less impressive, but that's really because we never really get to learn enough about the real Liz Shaw for the alternate version to feel distinctly different. I do like the little love story going on between Greg and Petra in both universes. It's very rare to see a romantic subplot in Doctor Who, and it works very well. The destruction of the parallel world makes for a very exciting penultimate episode, but it does mean the final episode is a bit of a letdown. Still, apart from that, it's an excellent story. 9. Overall, it's been a very strong season. You can tell they've made an effort to appeal to an older audience, and it works. Even 50 years later, it's still highly watchable. From what I remember of the next season, I suspect it goes back to being silly very soon. But at least we had these few stories to show that Doctor Who doesn't always have to be a kids' show. So in the next instalment, I'll be looking at Season 8, with the introduction of Joe Grant and the Master, which should be interesting. Realistically, that probably won't be until after Christmas. So subscribe if you want to be sure of catching it. Or check out the playlist of my other Doctor Who videos in the description below. And I'll hopefully see you next time.